The 32nd Guam Youth Congress is now in session. May I call upon Representative Byron Bloss to lead the prayer.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for bringing us all here safely today. We thank you for all the blessings you have given us in our lives. And we ask that each thought, each word, each deed of mind shall be an act of love divine, and everything that I shall do for you shall be my God for love of you. The gift of life you gave to me, but let my heart your dwelling be. What is there that I will not do? My God in me, for love of you. Amen. Mary, seat of wisdom. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I call upon Representative Josh DeChoso to sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn
I call upon Representative Noel DeGracia to sing the Guam hymn.
Fenogi chamor.
I call upon Representative Abel Duenas for the recitation of the Inifresi.
Inifresi, gini mustakalo.
Thank you. You may be seated. Can I get a roll call, please?
Representative Uggan. Representative Byron Blas. Representative Travis Blas. Representative Abriana Cruz. Representative DeHelig. Representative De Gracia. Representative DeChoso. Representative Dinsman. Representative DeLohan. Representative Duenas. Representative Felisan. Representative Garrido. Representative LeBang. Secretary Lorenzo. Representative Maige. Representative Matanani. Representative Peretta. Representative Pierre Paul. Representative Kineni. Representative Quintaniza. Vice Speaker Richards. Representative Roque. Representative Rosario. Representative Elijah Santos. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Tyrone. Representative Trinidad. Speaker Valencia. Representative Valencia. Mr. Speaker, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any motions? Speaker Santos, you are recognized.
I make a motion to waive items 7 through 9 of the legislative agenda today.
There's been a motion to waive items 7 through 9 of the legislative session agenda. Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. Moving on to item number 10, reports of standing committees. Representative LeBang, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to report on Bill 2-32. Yesterday, I had the privilege to visit the Department of Youth Affairs Correction Facility. Juvenile facility. So I was able to meet the director of the UIA and the deputy director of the UIA, which is Ms. Brennan and Ms. Ogden. So regarding the Council of Youth Affairs, so they told me that with the passage of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Program Act, it created the State Advisory Group, which is like kind of the council, but they function the same as the council, so they kind of just went with the State Advisory Group instead of the council, because having two groups of council advising them is kind of chaotic for them, and it costs them price as well because of the stipends. So with that being said, I'm officially withdrawing Bill 2-32.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. Are there any other reports from standing committees? Seeing as there are none, we will move on. Would anyone like to make a motion to waive item 11 from the session agenda? Representative Santos, you're recognized.
I'll make a motion to waive item 11 from the session agenda, seeing as there are no select committees.
There's been a motion to waive item 11. Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. Moving on to introduction and first reading of bills.
Bill number 9-32, introduced by DeMarco Thomas Kennedy. An act to add section 6111 to chapter 6, title 3, Guam Code annotated, and amend section 7105 of chapter 7, title 3, Guam Code annotated, relative to establishing an independent designation for candidates for legislature in Guam. Bill number 10-32, introduced by DeMarco Thomas Kennedy. An act to amend section 3103.3 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 16, Guam Code annotated, relative to providing automatic voter registration for Guam residents. Bill number 15-32, introduced by Al Edrich C. Labang. An act to amend section 10.25 of Chapter 10, Title 18, Guam Code annotated, and to add a new section 25.5 of Chapter 25, Title 9, Guam Code annotated, relative to increasing the age of consent from 16 to 18 years of age, and to cite this act as Age Protection Act of 2019. Bill number 16-32, introduced by Joshua M. Miguel de Choso, Christian F. Valencia, Davin R. Felixon, Al Edrich C. Labang, Noel Brandon de Gracia. An act to add a new Chapter 93 to Title 9 Guam Code annotated, relative to providing family members of an individual who they fear is a danger to himself, herself, or others new tools to prevent gun violence, and to cite this act as the Gun Violence Prevention Order Act of 2019. Resolution number 11-32, introduced by Al Edrich C. Labang, Byron Blas, Casey Rosario, Isabel Valencia, Travis Blas, relative to recognizing the month of April 2019 as Youth Month, and to further commend organizations and individuals promoting the youth of Guam.
Thank you. Are there any motions?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I would like to make the first motion to move Bill 16-32 to the second reading file.
There's been a motion to move Bill 16-32 to the second reading file. Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Bill 16-32, the aptly named Gun Violence Prevention Order Act of 2019, is a straightforward piece of legislation. The language in the bill is modeled after legislation introduced to the Senate, particularly Bill S-1212. I'd like to take some time to briefly summarize what exactly the act sets out to do. The name of the game is prevention. Should this bill be passed into law, family members of a certain individual can apply for a gun prevention order from the Superior Court if they believe that the individual's access to a firearm is a threat to those around them. Due process is vital to this bill. Should the evidence provided by the applicant justify the applicant's request for an order, the Superior Court may issue a gun prevention order which would prohibit the individual's access to firearms. After the order is issued, the court may also issue a warrant if the individual already owns a firearm, which would allow a law enforcement officer to temporarily seize said firearms. This is just a basic summary of the functions of the act should it become law. I'm also aware that there were some questions regarding the bill, and I don't want to hog the microphone too long, so I'll go ahead and take a seat. I'm eager to answer any questions that might have arisen during this opening statement and to hear the thoughts of my fellow representatives regarding the Gun Violence Prevention Act of 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative de Choso. Would anyone like to speak on the bill? Representative Felixon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I'm in full support of this bill. I think that this is a great, excellent way of regulating guns without just full cold turkey taking guns away from everybody. And I think that this will save and prevent incidents such as the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting that is referenced in the bill. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Felison. Representative Tyron, you are recognized.
I have a question for the sponsor of the bill, if he would yield.
Representative DeChoso, do you yield?
Yes, I yield.
You may continue.
So I too am in support of this bill, but I was just wondering, I see your definition of danger. Can you further explain, like, what constitutes danger?
I'm sorry, my definition of danger, are you referring to any definition provided within the definition section of the Act? Or, just to clarify, am I allowed to?
Yes, and can you just expound more on that? Thank you.
Just a second, hang on, it's a very big bill. Thank you for the question. I would like to clarify that danger is not explicitly defined in the bill, only because danger is a loose term. We want to avoid providing a rigid definition on what danger is, only because a threat to society can manifest in different ways. And we see this with every example regarding mass shootings, whether it's no matter where it is, we see that a danger can manifest in different ways, and there's, as explained in the bill, evidence indicating that sort of danger manifests in too many ways for us to clearly define what danger is. I will say that it will be left up to the whims of the Superior Court, who will hear the applicant's request for an order. Does that answer the question?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Santos, you're recognized.
I'd like to ask a couple questions to the primary sponsor, if you would yield.
Do you yield?
Yes, I yield.
So, I was a part of the hearing, the committee meeting talking about Bill 16, and we had basically referred out the bill because of the interest of the primary sponsor to get this done at the certain time, with the acceptance that we would address our questions on the floor. So with that being in mind, I don't have all the questions, and I'm hoping that if the chair of the Public Safety and Judiciary comes in sometime sooner, that she'll be able to explain some of the questions further. But just some of my questions to start out. In reference to let me pull the page number. In reference to page 5, line A, or page 5, section A, a family member of any individual may submit an application to the Superior Court. And you go on to further define that a family member is a spouse, child, parent, legal guardian, sibling, grandchild, or grandparent of the individual. Is there any particular reason why this piece of legislation is specified to just family members to be able to apply for this gun prevention order?
Yes, thank you for your question. So the reason why this act particularly gives this, I would call it a tool to specifically family members, is because I believe, and those who also wrote the bill originally, like I said, this is modeled after legislation that was introduced to the Senate. We are of like minds to believe that a family member is, for lack of a better word, better suited to determine whether or not an individual poses a threat to society. They would have the practical knowledge. They would know whether or not the person actually owns a firearm. They would know where said firearm would be located. And also, family members tend to know us better than other people, and just on a, I would say, legislative level, it's safer to have family members be the ones to apply for the order, so that we can avoid people randomly applying orders for somebody they get a weird vibe from, right? We want to avoid people's rights being infringed upon, and that's why the family members are given this tool rather than everybody being able to apply for anyone. Yes.
Thank you. Seeing as Guam and many other places in the country, but particularly Guam is frequently, people tend to come and go as opportunity comes and goes. So you have a lot of people moving to Guam for work in the telecommunications industry or the tourism industry temporarily, and those people don't tend to bring their family with them. So I guess to follow up on the primary sponsor's response, Mr. Speaker, if an individual does not have family on Guam, does that mean that that person is immune to the ever being placed under this application for a gun violence prevention order?
Based on the language of the bill, yes, but there's a specific reason why family members are given this tool and not just anybody. To give an example, let's say my friend Jack. I don't have a friend named Jack, but I'm just using that name. But let's say my friend Jack, he gives me a weird vibe, right? Let's say he gives me a weird vibe whenever I see him at work. But I'm not related to him. I don't see him at his place of residence where he lives. I don't know his, I don't know the particulars of his life circumstances. And this can apply to us whenever we look at a, like as stated by the representative posing the question. We do not know the circumstances of let's say, a tourist or somebody who comes and goes, who's just visiting Guam, then leaves. And for that reason, we don't want to just give everybody that tool, though I am warm to that idea. But this bill sets out to give family members that tool specifically because in several examples that we've seen, whether it was the shooting in the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting or the shooting in 2012 in Aurora, family members were at the forefront of these shootings because they'd see the signs and they'd either act on it and then nothing happens, or they'd willfully ignore it. So we want to give this tool specifically to family members because they have the practical knowledge, and it's a safer choice so that we don't infringe on anybody's rights.
Thank you. Seeing as culturally on Guam, Mr. Speaker, family means so much, family is so much more broadly used as a definition or as a phrase and than perhaps somewhere stateside where a family member could also be a family friend or your godparents. I may be making an amendment to the definition of family member sometime later in the session, and I hope that the body will take that up. But as another question to the primary sponsor, I appreciate the fact that this bill is very thorough and chronological and going into the process of when each event happens, from the application to the warrant to the prevention order to the hearing, and it even defines the definitions of the rights to those who may have been falsely accused by their family members, which I think would be an interesting thing to have play out if a family member applies to this and the family members, but I'll save that question for another time. But one thing that's not very clear in the bill is section 93.04 on page 12. In regards to the wellness check, this wellness check is placed at the end of the section, so it seems to be in the end chronologically, but the definition of wellness check is not very clear in terms of what the difference is between a wellness check and when a person gets a gun violence prevention warrant. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess my question is, if the primary sponsor could expand on wellness checks and when in the process the wellness checks would happen, I think that would help us to clarify the language of the bill a little bit. So my question is, when does the primary sponsor feel that the wellness check should happen? And if he could more clearly define the definition of a wellness check?
Representative DeChoso.
Thank you for the question. I would like to begin my answer by first defining what a wellness check is based on the language of the bill. If everybody could direct their attention to page 4, line 22, that's where wellness check is defined. It is defined as a visit conducted by a law enforcement officer to the residence of an individual for the purpose of assessing whether the individual poses a danger to the individual or others due to a mental behavior or physical condition. So it's important to understand what the wellness check is. It's a visit conducted by a law enforcement officer. So the only time a wellness check is referenced again in the bill or in the act is on page 12, line 26, where it states that the Guam Police Department shall establish a procedure that requires a law enforcement to, in conjunction with performing a wellness check on an individual, check whether the individual is listed on the firearm database or registry of Guam. So the reason why it is vague on when the wellness check is to be conducted is for different reasons. The first is because it's a process, or it is a procedure that is subject to the whims of the Guam Police Department. It will be up to them on how they would like to conduct this. If an amendment if an amendment were to be introduced to solidify a better time for when the wellness check should be conducted, I'm warm to that idea. However, I believe it would be practical to keep that vague and leave it up to the whims of the Guam Police Department, only because they're better suited to know when would be the right time to, for lack of a better term, approach a person who was deemed a threat to society.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that we should try to get in contact with the chairman of the committee who reported this out, because I think that her perspective on this bill would be beneficial in the discussion. But one more question to the primary sponsor. Is the intention of this bill to, well, not maybe the intention, but is one intention of this bill to, I guess, Mr. Speaker, it kind of pains me to say this because I am a staunch advocate for gun control, and I feel hesitant to come to the defense a lot of times on being too loose when it comes to gun rights. But I guess my question is, is one of the intentions of the bill to take away gun rights to those people who have mental disorders like depression and autism and ADHD as the language is written in page 2, lines 10 through 18?
Representative DeChoso?
I'm sorry, could you reference or could you repeat the page and lines that you were referencing?
Page 2, lines 10 through 18, it references a list of mental health disorders. And I was wondering if I guess, Mr. Speaker, I'm questioning if the primary sponsor's intention is to restrict gun rights on those who may be suffering from mental health disorders, and if there's, well, I'll just start there, mental health disorders.
I'd like to start off by saying that as a conservative, this is the first time I've ever been told that I might be restricting gun rights, so this is a first for me. I will say this, though. My belief, and the only reason I'm talking about my belief, I'd like to stay away from the topic of what I believe and rather talk about what is in the bill. But the only reason I'm talking about my belief is because the question, it's in regards to the intention of the bill. So my belief on the Second Amendment is the same as most constitutionalists would feel about it, as well as what the Founding Fathers also set out to create, what they set out to accomplish when the Second Amendment was created. And that is, I'm trying to remember the quote, I'm going to paraphrase, sorry George Washington, but George Washington's, he had a quote talking about how the rights of the American people, who are peaceable people, to own a firearm shall not be infringed. That's a crude representation of his quote. The reason I bring that up is because the operative word in that quote is peaceable. I, along with many constitutionalists and people who also, and the Founding Fathers, believe that the right to bear arms is an integral bill to, or is an integral right that we have as an American people. However, that belief is too rigid in the fact that there are too many factors, and like I keep mentioning, Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, the shooter passed several background checks and ended up actually having the firearms legally, and that is what the intention of the bill. That's what the intention of the bill is to give people that tool to remove the access to firearms from people who they deem as a threat. And I understand the question, where the question is coming from, but I believe that people who are of not of a sound mental state should not have a tool such as a firearm. And that's not a radical view to have. Many people who believe what I believe in stronger background checks. We believe that that if you're going to own a firearm, you should be trained, you should be properly prepared, and you should know how to operate this tool. There's a reason why there's gun rights, but not knife rights, right? You don't have a right to own a knife for self-defense. You don't have not to my knowledge at least, that's not what the Second Amendment sets out to do. You don't have a right to own a golf club to protect your house, right? But you have a right to own a firearm to protect yourself from wherever that threat may come from, because it is the most efficient tool for what it is made to do. And thusly, because of its efficiency in what it is made to do, I believe that if you are not of sound mental mind, you should not be in possession of a firearm. And again, that's not a radical view to have. Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Choso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No further questions now, but perhaps amendments down the line, and I would like to reserve the remainder of my time to make testimony.
All right, thank you, Representative Santos. Would anyone else like to speak on the bill? Representative Secretary Lorenzo, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to take the time to say that I am in full support of this bill. I find that it is very necessary that we do have this. And I also just wanted to shed some light, and it's also related to gun control or gun violence. Recently, we had a shooting in New Zealand where 49 and counting were presumed dead. So I find that if we were to take the initiative as the youth to pass this in our body, it would show our island leaders in the 35th Guam legislature and around the island that we are serious about everything that was cited in this bill. And I just wanted to say that I am in full support, and I hope that my fellow representatives could support this too. Thank you. Oh. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion for a roll call to reflect Representative DeMarco Kaneni.
All right, are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes.
Thank you.
Representative Kaneni, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I read through Bill 16 last night, actually. It was one of those thorough reads, one that got you thinking. I actually have before I begin any testimony, I actually have a question for the author of the bill.
Representative DeChoso, do you yield?
Yes, I yield.
You may continue.
When it came to writing the Gun Violence Prevention Order Act, do you have any numbers on the number of gun violence incidents on Guam?
I do not have the specific, okay, I'll say this. I don't have the specific numbers on homicides relating to gun violence on Guam. I will say that there are, I'm trying to remember the source, but there are 20, I'll search up the source of the information I'm about to put out. But I believe there are 20,000 guns on island that are owned. I'll try to confirm that number later. But, excuse me. I don't have those numbers, but I will say why. The reason why is because those numbers aren't necessarily relevant. They are relevant to an extent. I think it is important to know just what impact gun violence does have on Guam. However, this act is it's a preventative measure. I see it more fruitful to pass a bill or an act that gives people the power to prevent gun violence rather than looking at numbers saying this is how much gun violence happens here on Guam and then passing legislation afterwards. Yeah, so I don't have those numbers. If somebody does, I think it would help to know. I will say though that this is a preventative measure, not a measure in response to any particular crimes on Guam. Yep.
Thank you, Representative DeChoso. Does that answer your question, Representative?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
You may continue.
Okay. I'm a staunch believer in the Second Amendment also. As a Democrat, that's sometimes hard to believe. I have certain views that allow me to believe that, gun control is one of those things that should be debated more. It should be talked about more. But it doesn't happen because both sides are so staunchly against each other. When it comes to gun control, when it comes to gun reform, I believe in less guns on the street, not more. So I like the intention of this bill, but as I was reading through parts of it, don't the police have a system in place for this already? And when is the last time you heard of gun violence on Guam? Yes, you hear of gun violence in the States all the time, from school shootings to massacres, internationally even. But I've been living on Guam for the past, 15, 16 years, and I can't say never, but I have very seldomly heard of any occurrences happening with gun violence. And I appreciate Representative DeChoso saying this is a preventative measure, but to implement all these different new warrants and laws for something that really isn't an issue on Guam, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying is almost why are we doing this if we don't have the issue? With that being said, I also when it comes to also the rights to arms, Representative Chose was talking about, our founding fathers and how it was established, for the nation. I would like to keep in mind that Guam was not in their mind when they were writing the Constitution. With the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, most of the amendments, Guam was not kept in mind. And we have a different community here than we do in the United States. So anything that perpetuates we even have a small source of gun violence can be detrimental to the community. Other than that, I like that it is a preventative bill, but preventing what? I have nothing else to say on this bill. It's a good preventative bill, but what's it going to prevent in the future? I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative LeBang, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I first want to say that I support this bill, and I kind of have a different sentiment from the retiring speaker. It's just that even though we don't have those issues today, I think we should still deal with them, because who knows, in the future we might have it. So with this bill, I think we will have something in place. My only concern will be on page 4, on lines 22 to 23, when it comes with the definition of wellness check. I have an amendment to add. So, wellness check is a visit conducted by law enforcement officer to the residence of individual for purpose of assessing whether the individual presents a danger to the individual or others due to mental, behavioral, or psychological or physical health. I just want to add after enforcer with a psychological therapist, because I think a law enforcement officer might be unable to determine the mental or behavioral condition of the individual. At least with psychological therapists, we have someone to determine that. So I'm proposing that amendment.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. Would anyone like to speak on the amendment? Representative Santos, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am in full support of having psychologists be a part of this wellness check process, even though my apprehensions to the procedures of the wellness check being unclear make me hesitant about the wellness check in general. I think combining the safety experience of the police and the psychological and behavioral expertise of a psychologist together would help to ensure that this wellness check is for the sake of wellness and for the mental health of the individual who is undergoing this wellness check. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Santos. Representative DeChosa.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I want to just say that as the primary sponsor of this bill, I am in full support of this amendment. I believe that that's a very valuable, it's a very valuable addition to have to the wellness check, and I think that should definitely be something that should be added to the bill. So I thank Representative LeBang for this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Tehilig? No. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? Representative DeGracia.
So I'd just like to express my full support for this bill. So,
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. We're still talking about the amendment.
The amendment, yes. Would you like to speak on the amendment or the bill?
yes, sir. My apologies. I actually support the, the amendment about the having the psychological therapists because I feel if a police officer or a law enforcement officer were to conduct the wellness check on the individual that does pose a threat, I'm not too sure what kind of qualifications or credentials that law enforcement officer might have in order for him to be qualified to be checking that person that does pose a threat. So to me, it does make sense to have a psychological therapist with the officer because I feel like they're more certified in that position and in that area in order to qualify that person that poses a threat, especially with a firearm. So I do support the amendment and have that included on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeGracia. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? Representative Kennedy.
Actually, just have a question for the author of the amendment.
Representative LeBang, do you yield?
Yes.
What exactly is your definition of a psychological therapist? Because as someone who's very close to the medical community, even that to me is a very, very vague term.
Okay. Just one moment. Okay, so psychological therapists are doctoral level psychologists who provide psychotherapy and counseling. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. But I guess the one point I want to make is when it comes to the difference between people who have the science to actually give advice about this, expert opinion, versus therapists who are there for controlled settings, for safer settings. I think the difference is very big. And when it comes to bringing a psychological therapist to a suspected mental health patient with a gun or with a gun violence protection order, I'm starting to see the safety issues for the therapist. Maybe the officers are trained to handle the situation, of course, but are these psychological therapists trained to handle the situation? Also, with the wording of psychological therapists, it doesn't even sound, professional enough to be giving this advice to people who are on the verge of committing violence. I believe either a psychiatrist or a licensed psychologist would be more beneficial than just saying a psychological therapist in the
just point
amendment.
Of order, psychologists are not MDs, they're PhDs. PhDs are a doctor in philosophy. They study the field, not in the medical. So psychological therapist is the MD. I hope that answers his opinion.
Actually, point of order for that is psychiatrists are MDs. They have their full medical degrees.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. According to the staffing pattern, the Guam Police Department currently has employed 2 psychiatric technicians. So if that might be one avenue to combine police experience under the police department with psychiatric knowledge, that could be a good compromise.
Thank you, Representative Santos. Representative Kennedy.
I have nothing further to say on the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Tyron, on the amendment.
I'd just like to express my full support for this amendment, as I see the term given by Representative LeBang is totally appropriate. And actually, if you look at the data, it says here, according to the behavioral and health centers, that psychologists are more likely to work with individuals with serious mental illnesses and are equipped with the skills to handle it when they're, being educated on it. So with that information, I strongly support the amendment being proposed, and thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tyron. On the amendment, would anyone else like to speak? Seeing as there's nobody else, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing as there are none, the amendment passes. On the main motion, our Representative LeBang.
I just want to expand on my testimony because as an educator, future educator basically, I feel that teachers and students will be more safe within our community. And maybe we can have lessen the chance of school mass shooting in Island if, hope, knock on wood, that it doesn't happen. I just say that I'm in full support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. On the main motion, Representative Maige, you are recognized.
Just a point of information. According to gunpolicy.org, there is an estimated total number of guns, both licit and illicit, of 20,000 as of 2017. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like to reserve your time, or was that a point of information?
Point of information.
Okay, thank you. Representative Santos, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have placed an amendment to lines 14 to 16 of page 2 of the bill, striking out state investigators reported he had depression, autism, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I have proffered this amendment for a couple reasons. First off, the bill does not explicitly define any mental disorders that would be considered under this bill. I think that that would be left up to the interpretation of the police department, but having this language in the legislative findings and intent, lawyers will be looking into the intent of this bill and see that the intention of this bill was to target these individual mental health problems. And I feel like this, if this language were not in the bill would be more broad scoping and be more up to the interpretation of the police department without being weighed down by this language. A second reason why I have proffered this amendment is because I feel as though a lot of the propaganda for gun rights has been focused on mental health being the real problem, when I think more discussion needs to be put on specific mental health disorders, or if this bill were to pass, allow it to be broad scoping enough to not be seen as a propaganda, but as a wide scoping piece of legislation for the safety of the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Santos. On the amendment, would anyone like to speak? Seeing as no one, are there any objections? If not, the amendment passes. On the main motion, Representative DeHelig, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe in the right I believe in our rights of individualism, but I also believe that the government should not wait until something bad to happen in order for us to act. Preventing a sickness is always better than treating one. I believe that this bill allows for families and those closest to us to keep our community safe.
And with that, I'd like to say that I do support the bill of this. Suzus Mahasi.
Thank you, Representative DeHelig. Would anyone else like to speak on the main motion?
I'd like to call for a 1-minute recess.
Are there any objections? We're in recess. 32nd Guam Congress is now back in session. Representative Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have another amendment to line 28 of page 3 of the bill, where it starts individual, adding or any other individual determined by the Guam Police Department to have a relationship to the individual that is familial in nature. And the reason why I introduced this amendment is to clarify that sometimes a lot of times in our culture we have family that aren't by blood, and we have because of our hospitality, the culture of hospitality and of reciprocity, we have branched out our family beyond individuals who are related to us biologically. And I think that this amendment would allow the police department to be more thorough in understanding, and it'll also give them the discretion to decide who is that familial in nature. Like if you were a family friend who was basically an uncle who raised the child only to see them be sucked into violence, or if it's just some person down the street who doesn't really, or just some person across the street who doesn't know all the information about the individual. So I think giving more powers to the police department to be able to make this call on who's family and who's not is more suited to local culture, because as the primary sponsor mentioned, this is modeled after legislation on the federal level. But I think in order to have this kind of legislation work on the local level, you need a cultural, you need to accommodate for the local culture. So that's why I sponsored that's why I've moved to have this amendment heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? Representative LeBang, you're recognized.
I guess I just want to clarify with the sponsor of the amendment. Does this include, I have a question basically.
Representative Sanchez.
Does this include like the in-laws of the individual, like how related?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Like with the amendment you're proctoring, would it include the in-laws? And yeah, that's the first one.
Mr. Speaker, my answer to the question would be that it's up to the police department on a case-by-case basis, because during the process that is defined in the law, where after the application for the gun violence, the examination of applicants and witnesses would happen. I think during
the page and line number.
Oh, okay, yeah. On page 5, the process from application, which is line 1, to line 21, which is the application and the examination. The language in the bill has the applicant and other witnesses be a part of the process. So my hope is that with this new language, the police department can make the call on whether this in-law was close enough to the individual to constitute whether or not they're able to apply and get this warrant, or whether they're qualified to get this warrant, or any other person. I think in-laws could be included, but the real point of the amendment is to allow for the police department to have the discretion, and if the police department finds that this is a stranger who doesn't know enough about the individual to come from that place of caring that I think this measure is trying to ensure, then they would not be heard and they would not their application will be not accepted. So I hope that answers the question, Mr. Speaker.
Representative LeBang.
Yes, this answers my question, and I fully support this amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, Representative Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I just want to state my concern of this amendment. I believe that this is actually kind of harming the intention of the bill, because I think when you state familial nature, that's kind of vague. Most of this bill is clearly defined in its intentions and act, but I'm not sure if the author is open to clearly defining familial nature. I know he stated earlier that we do have family friends that may seem, close, but I think that if it's more clearly defined in this amendment to state, I'm not too sure if he would be open to listing out everything. I think that may be too much, but if he could eloquate it more clearly, that'd make this seem more solid. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Did you want to pose a question to the author?
Sure.
Representative Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the concerns that Representative Blas is trying to address, but the whole point of this legislation is not to narrow it down, but to give more authority to the Guam Police Department to be able to enforce this with the best of their abilities. I think that by allowing the police department to determine, I think the definition, the idea of having the definition is counterintuitive to this amendment, because we're not trying to define who is qualified, but rather we're trying to let the police department do their job and make these important calls for the safety of our community. Because I sponsor this amendment, and I think that this bill is a good idea, but I'm not trained in public safety, and I'm not trained on psychology of who would be qualified as being able to be a part of this program. I'm not qualified to say who is family and who is not, and I feel that the police department determining in the process of the application who is family or not is a lot more stronger and will keep our community more safe than having a clear-cut definition. So yeah, I hope that answers my question.
Just to clarify, you're saying rather than defining familial in nature, we're leaving it subject to the discretion of the Guam Police Department.
Yes, because I believe that they have the understanding, because they're the ones that will be enacting this bill, to make those calls.
Representative Blas, does that answer your question?
In some ways, yes. I'd just like to say that although we can give some leeway in legal matters to the proper officials, I think for me personally, when it comes down to a measure like this regarding gun control, it shouldn't be based on rather what is best suited for the officials. Let me just rephrase that. I think we should more clearly define it in this case, because I believe that gun control is still a very hot topic, especially in this modern age, and to try to, of course, appease the public in what we're trying to do here, I think we need to best clearly define that for the sake of everyone in the matter, even for those acting in policy. So that's just my rebuttal, but in that way from Mr. Santos, I guess that does partially answer my question, so thank you.
Thank you, Representative Blas. On the amendment, would anyone else like to speak? Representative Kaneni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to share Representative Blas's sentiments about the wording of the bill. I believe it's a little bit too vague, and how do we expect the police department to know what family is if our law doesn't even clearly define what it is? Giving them the discretion to choose and pick whose family. If everybody in here is comfortable with that, I have no problem voting for the, going along with the amendment, but I feel that if family or anything is not clearly defined in the law, it leaves rooms for loopholes and other problems in the near future if we don't create solid, concrete, sealed laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative DeChoso on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I would like to just chip in my opinion on the amendment. Now, as I made clear, I already made clear about how I felt about the definition of family member within this act. However, I do have to concede my point. That in being, as explained to me, I believe it was during recess, if I remember correctly. Guam, the way family works on Guam is very different from other places, and this legislation was modeled after legislation passed in Senate abroad, or not abroad, but not here on Guam. So that being said, we have to take into account that Guam, as stated earlier, does have a different community, and that a close family friend can be an auntie or an uncle or a cousin, and it's simply, and the whole point of it being vague with familial with the wording familial nature, it is in a way meant to be vague because if you were to define what familial in nature is specifically in the amendment, that defeats the purpose of the amendment, which is to give that sort of a leeway to Guam Police Department in providing these tools to people who feel that there are certain individuals in our society who pose a certain risk to public safety. So I support the amendment, but I do understand where everybody's coming from because I had to concede my point earlier. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeChoso. On the amendment, would anyone else like to speak?
Mr. Speaker, would I be able to make closing statements on the amendment?
Sure. If no one else would like to speak on the amendment, you may.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I thank all the individuals who have provided their concerns on the on this amendment, and I think that for the interest in ensuring that we don't over-legislate, because I think a lot of times legislation has to find a balance between allowing laws to be enacted and allowing the executive agencies to do their jobs the way that they see fit. I know that a lot of times I know that a lot of times when executive agencies feel that the legislative branch is stepping on their toes a little bit, then that is counterintuitive to the goal of cooperating within the government branches. So this is a way to not step on the toes of the police department and allow them to do their job to the way they see fit. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Santos. On the amendment, are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, the amendment passes. On the main motion, Secretary Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to make a motion for roll call to reflect Representative Janae in the back, and Representative Travis Blas for both of them.
Seeing as there are no objections, motion passes.
Thank you.
On the main motion, would anyone like to speak? Seeing as there's no one else, Representative DeChoso, you may make your closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. So before I move on with my closing statements, I'm just gonna pick up my laptop. Before I move on to my closing statements, I just want to thank everybody for the numerous amendments being made to the bill. I appreciate that I was given the opportunity to concede some of my points, and I feel that the bill before and after, I believe it's looking a lot better now. Thank you for everybody's opinions, and I believe that there was a very fruitful discussion. I do want to respond to one thing, though. I do want to respond to the idea that the Constitution was written in a different time, because the Constitution was actually written with the future in mind. I wish I had had internet on this laptop so I could actually search up how the founding fathers came to writing the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment was written with a very specific idea. It wasn't written just so people can own guns, even though that's usually what people do. But the reason why it is important to have an armed populace is because you have to remember that the founding fathers came. They had just survived a war. They had just won a war against a tyrannical government, and that is why the Second Amendment was written in a specific way to give people their rights. Or not to give people their rights, but to enshrine the right of self-preservation, whether that threat was domestic or foreign, and whether that came from your fellow citizens or from your own government. That being said, all that talk about the Second Amendment does not give leeway to the fact that there are people who slip through the cracks. And there were more questions, such as, why are we doing this, right? What are we trying to prevent? I'll tell you what we're trying to prevent. What we're trying to prevent is a Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, because between 2008 and 2017, there were 45 calls made to the sheriff's office, as well as one tip to the FBI's public line, citing the shooter, or the shooter to be, citing his social media, as well as other red flags that indicated that this man was a threat to the people around him. However, the sheriff's office, they did nothing. And as a result, 34 people were shot, and of those, 17 were dead. We want to avoid something like that. We also want to avoid a Seventh-day Adventist clinic shooting, which happened here on Guam in 2001. And while we are so blessed that nothing like this has happened since, you'd be hard-pressed to find a reason as to why we shouldn't try to prevent it. Just because, here's a crude example. Let's say car accidents on Guam were to suddenly stop happening. Everybody started driving safe. Here on Guam, that would be a miracle, right? Let's say people started driving safely and responsibly, right? Does that mean we should remove seatbelts from cars? Because why do we wear seatbelts? It's a preventative measure. The same thing goes with helmets. Same thing goes with all other laws that can be referenced as preventative measures. This bill is a preventative measure, and that is why we are doing this, and that is what we are trying to prevent. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my closing statement. I'm sorry if I'm talking a lot. I promise this won't be happening again too soon. But
it's your time.
But I would like to say, though, as a conservative, I believe that the Constitution of the United States enshrines the right to bear arms and explicitly states that the government shall not infringe upon that right. Now, not everyone may agree with that belief, and that's okay. Like we just had, I think there's a fruitful discussion to be had in regards to gun rights and gun violence. However, I believe there is one thing that reasonable people on both sides of the aisle can agree on, and that is effective preventative measures that don't impede on the rights of the people are always necessary. This bill, 16-32, is a preventative measure that seeks to fulfill those qualities. It is effective, doesn't infringe on gun rights, and is necessary. So let's talk about it. The bill is effective. Of course, we won't truly know until it is passed into law. But lucky for us, there is precedent. As I explained earlier, a similar bill was passed into law in California. In its early years, the Los Angeles County reported 32 orders issued. That might seem like a small number, But remember, that is 32 people who were deemed as a potential threat to those around them. 32 instances of gun violence that were prevented thanks to this law passed in California, on which this bill was based off of. This bill does not infringe upon gun rights. As an American, first and foremost, I believe that the concept of due process is a foundation of a free society. And as I explained prior, Bill 1632 prioritizes due process. When an applicant applies for a gun violence prevention warrant, the burden of proof falls upon them. They must provide evidence in whatever form that may manifest in order for the court to determine whether the applicant's request is justified. The bill is designed to combat gun violence while also acknowledging an individual's Second Amendment rights. And lastly, this bill is necessary. It seems, and this is wild to me, it seems as though the issue of gun violence becomes a relevant topic only after a shooting. But what about beforehand? What about before the shooter wields a firearm against his fellow citizens? I'd like to call attention, as I have earlier, to one of the most devastating shootings to occur in America, the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. But like I said, between 2008 and 2017, the sheriff's office received, at the very least, 45 calls made in reference to the shooter, and that's only the calls that were documented. There are some reports saying that there could be more. And there were various red flags that indicated he was planning the shooting. Like I said, the sheriff's office, they did nothing. And on February 14, 2018, 34 students and staff members were shot. Of that number, 17 died. This bill seeks to rectify in any capacity the wrongs of the past by filling a gap in which preventative measures should have been in place, but were not. This bill would enshrine the idea that law enforcement agencies in this country, and more particularly here on Guam, have a duty and a responsibility to act upon dangers to the safety of the public if the evidence indicates a threat. I ask that my fellow representatives vote in favor of this bill, because every vote in favor of this bill is a vote in favor of accountability and for safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeChoso. Do you have a motion?
Yes, thank you. I would like to make a motion to move Bill 16-32 to the third reading file.
Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. Representative Kennedy, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to amend the session agenda to add Resolution 12-32.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. I think amending the agenda is a notwithstanding House Rules motion.
Correct. Representative Kennedy.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, it requires a 3/4 vote by the body if we are going to amend the session agenda on the floor.
All right. Are there any objections on the motion? All right. I guess we'll take it to a vote if it requires 3/4. Okay, just by show of hands to amend the session agenda. All right. Motion passes. Representative Kennedy.
I would also like to make a motion to place Bill number 9-32 into the second reading file.
Are there any objections? None. Motion passes. You may continue.
Okay. I'm going to forfeit my opening statement for this bill because I did give it last session. If there are any concerns or questions with this bill, now is the time to ask, because I will be giving a closing statement only. Thank you.
Would anyone like to speak on the main motion? Representative Bloss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I would just like to say that Bill number 9-32, I believe there wasn't really anything substantially wrong with it last session. I think due to a lack of clarification, this was referred out of committee. But anyway, we did make some changes to it. So if any of you still have concerns with this bill, please feel free to ask either me or Representative Kennedy, because we were there at the committee meeting last month, and we believe that now there shouldn't be any reason to refer it back out, and it should be voted. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Blas, are you a co-sponsor for the bill?
Oh, no, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. I'm the vice chair of the committee that this was referred to.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
On the main motion, would anyone else like to speak? Seeing Representative Tyron, you are recognized.
I have a question for the sponsor of the bill, if he would yield.
Representative Kaneni,
I yield.
you may continue.
I am sorry, I know this may have been touched upon last time, but so essentially the bill bypasses the primary, right? Because
Yeah, the main issue, I guess the main issue last session was, I guess, trying to get a primary process for the independent candidates, and we decided to kick it to committee to try to resolve that. But in the committee of General Government Operations and Taxation, we realized that a primary process for independent candidates still defeats the purpose of independent candidates. So we decided to re-refer this bill out as is, with even Representative LeBang giving the okay, because he was the one who referred it back to committee last session.
okay, may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes. If you will yield.
I yield.
All right.
Well, do you yield? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, can you further expound on the cap of 15 candidates? And
Okay.
why?
The 15 candidate cap is something that both the Democratic and Republican sides do after the primary election to limit the amount of people that are in the general election for the Guam legislature. The reason why I capped the independent candidates at 15 also is to make sure that there was not an overcrowding of independent candidates with Democratic and Republican candidates in the general election. Now, I know that 45 people for 15 seats sounds a lot, but the realistic expectation of this bill was to allow a handful of people to run, not the full 15, not a full 20 if that was the case, but it was just for a handful of people who felt like the party politics just was not their thing, and they still had the means to achieving a seat in the Guam legislature.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to speak on the main motion? Seeing as there's no one else, Representative Kaneni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill 9-32 was created with a simple reason. It was to allow independent candidates with no party affiliation to run for the Guam legislature. I think it's a correct step in a couple parts of an electoral reform. I look forward to discussing the next bill, which is a lot more important to me. Thank you. With that, I would like to make a motion to place Bill number 9-32 into the third reading file.
If there are no objections, motion passes.
I would also like to make a motion to place Bill 10-32 into the second reading file.
Are there any objections? As there are none, motion passes. You may continue.
Okay. Bill number 10-32 is is the new bill this month. It's relative to providing an automatic voter registration for Guam residents through the Department of Revenue and Taxation, and eventually UOG and GCC, to allow for a smooth and a system of continual renewal of voter affidavits and to register people to vote on Guam. One of the things we were talking about during the committee meeting was I guess the issue of intra-agency cooperation. But we felt that the Guam Election Commission, whose sole job is to manage elections, should be able to handle people who want to register to vote, not just the process they have now, which is filling out the paper at your mayor's office or at the actual election commission, but to give you an option of doing it while you're doing your other errands or while you're registering for other things such as UOG classes, GCC classes, or getting your driver's license or your permit at DMV. It's to make registering to vote, one of those things that you can do alongside another important task instead of taking time out of your day to find a separate time to do it. I really didn't see any concern for the bill besides a physical note that was attached to the original language of this bill, which was, sorry, let me pull the original number. This was originally bill number 234-34 in the Guam legislature. There was a bipartisan effort by the 34th Guam legislature, introduced by Senator Regine Bisco-Lee, Senator San Augustine, Senator Castro, Senator Torres, former Senator Esteves, and former Senator Morrison. According to the physical note, it was the price for this bill was around $1,500 to $5,000, and according to them, it was just to print forms. So I feel like either the Department of Revenue Taxation, the Guam Election Commission, or whoever decides to jump in on the Automatic Voter Registration Act can handle the responsibility of printing out forms. Other than that, that's my opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. On the bill, would anyone like to speak? Representative LeBang, you are recognized.
I just have one question to clarify with the sponsor, if he would yield.
Do you yield? Representative LeBang, you may continue.
Okay. So if, for example, I move to a different village and I want to change my voting place, would I be able to do the process with this bill as well?
As a hypothetical, I can see that if you're going to change your address, you probably have to change it on your driver's license too. So I can see that maybe being helpful, but I can see that also being a burden to the Election Commission. If you're going to change villages, that's one of the processes I probably suggest you go directly to the Election Commission or your mayor's office to do.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah. So anyways, I think this is a good step towards having people really vote on election, because like all you have to do is just be registered when you do your driver's license, and the process would be you just have to go to the voting place, basically. Yeah, so I fully support this bill.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. Would anyone else like to speak? Representative Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am fully in support of this bill because I think that this bill will allow the legislature to harness some of the most important votes in our community, which is the youth vote. A lot of the, and that's not to say that you know, those who are older than us and more experienced vote is less important. But I think that the youth vote is a vote that's not harnessed in the way that it should be, especially because the youth inherit all the decisions that take place now. And the way that I see that this bill will harness the youth vote is because I think that Yeah, I think that if this bill were to pass and more people who are getting their licenses in their adulthood, and the sponsor could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this bill will apply to those getting their license in high school, those in high school who are under a law that was written by former Senator Underwood, who allowed those who are 17 at the time of the primary, who would be 18 at the time of the general, to vote in the general election, or to vote in both the primary and the general election. So I think if this bill did apply to them, and I think it would, then those who are getting their license or getting their learner's permit at this point in time would also benefit from being able to be registered to vote. And I think that this bill is a good initiative. But I did have one question for the primary sponsor, if he would so yield.
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
You may continue.
So I'm just taking a look at the bill, and I apologize for my oversight of not putting page numbers on the bill as Committee on Rules Chairman. But on the second page of the bill, Section B of Section 3103.3, where it says every person applying for a learner's permit and meets the requirement to pre-register to vote shall be afforded the opportunity to pre-register to vote. I'm not sure if it's somewhere else in the language, but I think the entire body would benefit in clarifying whether the language also supports those getting their driver's license to, or applying for their driver's license to be able to get their, to register to vote, or is it only those applying to the learner's permit? And if that's the case, that it's only the learner's permit, was there a particular reason that the sponsor in the Youth Congress, or if any research was done so that the sponsor in the legislature in the previous term made that distinction between learner's permit? I think that would, I think answering that question would benefit the rest of the body's understanding.
I'm sorry, between all the testimony, I kind of lost track of what's the actual question?
Does the bill, the Section B says every person's applying for a learner's permit shall be afforded the right to pre-register to vote, but does this bill also afford, I'm not too familiar in the entire legislation, but does this bill also afford those getting the licenses? And do you know if there's a reason why it's specifically applied to learner's permits?
Okay. The reason why this section specifically says learner's permit is because this is the first step in the process to getting your driver's license. So the people who are normally getting their learner's permits are people 16, 17 who are not usually eligible to vote. So we give them the requirements for pre-registration. However, in the in the next section, it starts talking about the application to register to vote must be offered simultaneously with the application of a Guam driver's license, the Guam identification card, or the renewal of either or both. So it's not even the license, it's also the Guam ID, it's your driver's license, and if you're doing both, you have the chance to still register. The pre-registering to vote only applies to the learner permit category of this bill.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, could you, Mr. Speaker, if the primary sponsor wouldn't mind, could you clarify the sections of the learner's, or the driver's license and the Guam ID?
Sorry, in the section right below B, where it says C and 1, it gives the straight, on the same page as, it's gonna be line 6 through 8. Page 2, line 6 through 8.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask another question. So the driver's license, does that mean that if this is not underlined, does that mean that this is already in the law?
Damn. Yeah, sorry. I'm blanking out. Yeah, the parts of these were already in the law. It was just the fact that the Department of Revenue and Taxation is not in any enforcement of this at all, and 2, we wanted to add certain sections to make it easier to streamline automatic voter registration. The Department of Revenue and Taxation is supposed to have a process to registering people at the DMV, but that's something that hasn't happened in years. So this bill is introduced to streamline the process, to lay out what the requirements are, and to make sure that the Department of Revenue and Taxation now has to kind of take this on as an undertaking for the betterment of the people of Guam.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to the primary sponsor for asking for answering my questions. I think that, yeah, if all this stuff is already in law, then I can see why this legislation was introduced, because as I've mentioned in previous terms, the government of Guam has not only a problem with unfunded mandates, but mandates not being seen to fruition. So I see this bill not only as a wake-up call to put this in the forefront to make sure that this issue is recognized and that this piece of law and the combining legislation as it's currently written can be heard. And like I said earlier, I think it will help the youth vote. So I'm in support of this bill. And I thank the primary sponsor for introducing it into this body, because having the youth vote behind this body will serve to energize the cause, which is getting the youth vote out through this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Santos. On the main motion, Representative Tyron, you're recognized.
Sorry, I have a question for the sponsor of the bill, if he would yield.
Do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
You may continue.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to know, like, whether it would affect the wait time for people that go to DMV.
I guess it kind of is. It is going to be an extra process. It's supposed to go in with your application. It's supposed to be signed and saved with your documents also. So while you're getting your driver's license renewed, you're supposed to also be getting they're supposed to be taking down your information for voter registration. So it might take a little bit extra time, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. That is all.
Thank you, Representative Tyron. Would anyone else like to speak on the main motion? Seeing as there's no one else, Representative Kennedy, you may make your closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, the last couple of my bills have all been related to elections or democracy in some kind of form, from the government of Guam election day as a holiday to the independent candidates to now of automatic voter registration. Because to me, elections and democracy are one of the key things we need to protect as a youth if we wanted to see it into our future. And strengthening our process and improving our process is one of the ways, that we can contribute as a youth to the future of this island. And I feel like an automatic voter registration is one of those small steps we can take to ensure that everybody gets the right to vote, because it's one of the most overlooked rights, especially here on island. And I feel that if everybody has a voice and everyone gives a reasonable voice to the government, we can continue to do great things for the island of Guam. Thank you.
Representative Kennedy, do you have a motion?
Yes, I make a motion to place Bill 10-32 into the third reading file.
If there are no objections, motion passes. Moving on. Representative LeBang.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 15-32 to second reading file.
Any objections? Motion passes. You may continue.
Colleagues, Bill 15-32 is a similar bill to Bill 24-31, which was introduced last term by former Guam Youth Congress Representative Gia Rigetti. Bill 15-32, or the Age Protection Act of 2019, intends to raise the age of consent from 16 to 18 years old and to allow a close-in-age relationship among the youth. As stated in the intent of the bill, youths under the age of 18 may not have the capability to be matured enough to face the lasting consequences of sexual relations. This bill protects minors from potential danger and from sexual predators. Secondly, the close-in-age exemption allows adult youth to be able to date their youth whom have a close age to them of 3 years, which is stated on the bill. I think 3 years is enough and the right age. Cody, we should not restrict our youths who we represent from choosing who they want to be in relationship with. The government should not stop the youth to love someone who is about the same age as them. The close-in age exemption has been a topic currently to those who have been a topic recently in our government today, because like I know there's a bill in the 35th Guam legislature that is talking about the close-in age gap. Currently, those who have consensual relationships that the current law seems to be a crime causes more severe punishment to the accused. With the current age of consent of 16, that 16-year-old can be sentenced to prison up to 8 years. Furthermore, that 16 years old is unable to enlist in the military and serve the country. He or she won't be able to get a job within the government of Guam or work in a field where minor is present. With the approach of Bill 15-32, it would raise the age of consent and would allow youths to have close-in age relationship with their fellow youths, who's considered adult. Bill 15-32 will protect our youth from sexual predators. In closing, the Attorney General's office have given the support with the close-in age gap exemption. And moving forward, I feel that Guam's youth will be safe and that our island's future will be bright. Thank you.
On the main motion, would anyone like to speak on the bill? Representative DeGracia, you are recognized.
I'd just like to pose a question for the author of this bill.
Do you yield? You may continue, Representative.
So I just wanted to clarify on page 2, line 18, about the person is not less than 3 years older than the minor. Could you just clarify about what exactly that means?
So let's say if you're 18, it means that you can date someone younger than 3 years than you. Let's say I will say like, I'm sorry. So it's like, just hypothetically, if you're 18 years old, it means that you are able to date someone that's less than 3 years of your age. Like, I'll say 15. (18 minus 3, 15).
So, if the age of consent were to be raised to 18, you're saying that a person at the age of 18 is allowed to date a person, let's say, at 15 years old? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And are they allowed to engage in any kind of like sexual contact with each other, or would that be violating this bill?
As long as there's consent, it will protect them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's all?
No further questions.
All right, thank you. Representative Tyron.
I have a question for the sponsor of the bill, if you would yield.
Representative LeBang.
Yes.
You may continue.
So, according to lines 5 through 6.
May I ask that he can speak?
Sorry,
kind of
okay,
louder,
so.
because I'm not able to hear his sentiments. Sorry.
Okay, so the consequences of like after an individual of the age of 16 has sex, right? And if they want to have abortion, who would that be determined by?
I'm sorry. I did not catch the question.
Who would, so if they have sex at the age, or because it says here that they're not fit to, one moment, enough to gauge the lasting consequences of sexual relations. So if someone is caught under the age of 18, then what happens or to the decision of abortion?
I guess we're not talking about abortion basically on this bill. That's why. It's the age of consent. Just use that to refer to that. To get an abortion, you need to be 18.
In the intent of the bill, it states that Guam law requires parental consent for abortions for females under the age of 18. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Santos, you're recognized.
No. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Committee on Rules chairman, when I reviewed this bill, I had decided in my referral that I would refer to the Speaker on a call of the rules, specifically section in Rule 6, Section 6.0401. I would like to pose the question to you whether this bill is of one subject matter, seeing as the definition of age of consent can be construed as one subject matter, and the close in age exemption can be construed as a second subject matter. So I would like to ask you as the chair to make a call on whether this bill is congruent with our rules or whether this bill should not be discussed by this body because it's not in accordance to our rules. It's up to you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for the bringing that up. Let's take a short recess to discuss this. We're now back in session. Representative LeBang, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, with that concern, I also have that concern as well. So I make a motion to strike out on bill on page 1, lines 13 to 15. Then on page 2, lines 1 to 3. That whole section, that whole paragraph. You need a copy? Or? Sorry.
Continue.
So I want to delete the paragraph starting from page 1, line 13, all the way to page 2, line 3. Then on, oh yeah, can we just call for the question on that first? Then I'm going to make the other amendments. Or do you want me to just do it all at once?
Do it all together.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, yeah, I think that the amendment has to fix the question of whether it's standing in the rules, and that amendment on its own doesn't fix the problem. So I think the amendment to fix the problem of the standing rules should be encompassing every aspect of it.
So it's just...
Yeah, so just do all of it.
Okay, sorry. Then on page 2, line 6, from the semicolon all the way to line 7, all the way to line 7. And the whole section 4 of this bill. And yeah, to fix the title as well. To just reflect an act to amend section 10.25 of chapter 10, title 8, Guam Code annotated, relative to increasing the age of consent from 16 to 18 years of age, and to cite this act as the Age Protection Act of 2019.
To clarify, the amendment is to cross out from the title the section about adding a new section 25.5, skipping over to relative to increasing ... To also cross out lines 13 through 15 on page 1, lines 1 through 3 on page 2, line 6 after the semicolon to the end of line 7, and the entire section 4 of the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment, are there any objections?
Can I state the reason why I'm...
Yes.
Okay. So I want to kind of amend this because as the main sponsor of this bill, I kind of feel it's also kind of a two-subject matter. I've been asking around and they said that it might be debatable, but I feel that this is the safer way to go and just have this to be passed, then probably I'm going to introduce another bill regarding the other half of this. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment, Representative Kineni.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to place a motion to strike the enacting clause of Bill 15-32.
You're making an amendment to the amendment?
No, I'm making a motion of precedence over a motion to amend.
And what is that motion again? Please repeat.
To strike the enacting clause of Bill 15-32. I feel like with two subject matters and the amendment striking half of this bill's no longer even in the same form as it was written, and should not even be debated by the Guam Youth Congress, and therefore should be either in the inactive file or stricken of its enactment clause, which is the same as defeating it on the floor.
As a speaker, I will allow it.
Just point of order. I think that
It's not. All we're doing is taking out the close in age exception. Are you saying that
it's
it
just
is not the same bill referred out of the committee?
This was not the same bill that the committee saw and that the Committee of Rules saw. This is an entirely different bill now with one subject matter stricken out, and I believe this is not even worth debating on the floor right now because so much of it has been gutted because it was deemed not even in concordance with the rules.
Could I just, for a point of inquiry, is that a motion that requires a vote?
Well, any motion with an objection requires a vote. Is that correct?
That being said, I'll object to the motion because I feel as though the title, as it's reflected, does not mention, or the original title doesn't mention the close in age exemption, and if we're crossing out the close in age exemption, then I think that that's supported by the way that the title reads, and I think, yeah, I object the motion.
And I agree with that. We will take the motion to a vote by show of hands. All those in favor of striking out the enactment clause, please raise your hand. Motion fails. On the amendment, would anyone like to speak? Representative Santos.
I think this amendment provides clarity and allows this bill to be able to be discussed by the body. That's all, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? All right. If there are no objections, then the amendment passes. Any objections, Representative Kennedy? No? All right. Amendment passes. On the main motion. Representative Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say that I do understand the intent of this bill, but I personally do not support it because if you were to change the age of consent to 18, what would happen to girls who are underage, who are from 16 to 18, who use birth control or other contraceptives to help with, for example, irregular periods? Would they be prevented from using that medication just because this law is an act? I also feel as if that with being 18 on this island, the only three things you could do is drive legally, join the military, or be tried as an adult. And with implementing the increased age of consent, I feel as if that it would just cause more problems than actually solving the issue at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cruz. Would anyone else like to speak? Representative Felison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to pose a question to the main sponsor of the bill.
Do you yield?
Do we give this?
Yes.
Please continue, Representative Felixson.
Referring to page 2, line 20, what exactly is...
Point of order, we're not talking about that already because we struck it out.
Yes, Representative Felixson, we struck out that section.
Section 4.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. Okay, sorry. My bad.
Thank you. That in mind, would anyone else like to speak on the main motion? If no one else would like to speak, Representative LeBang? Representative Santos?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that this bill, as it reads, is well-intended. I think that for the sake of protecting the youth, this bill is, I think that this bill comes from the right state of mind, but I do agree with the sentiments of Representative Cruz in saying that, you know, those who may be getting contraceptives from public health or for their health, and I think that there's more to this issue that needs to be addressed in terms of making sure, because protecting youth is something that as a body I think that we should uphold, but at the same time I think that we need to also uphold the right for youth to be able to make decisions for themselves. And I think that yes, we have set precedents in issues like dropout age and tobacco, but on the same hand, Mr. Speaker, I think that this bill, raising the age of consent, has a lot of unforeseen consequences on the health and well-being of many people on Guam, as well as for the potential for healthy and well-minded individuals to be prosecuted for acts that they feel that they've consented to, but the law does not allow them to. So I think that this bill, I agree with the sentiments of Representative Cruz. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Santos. If you could please take the chair for a moment.
We are now on the main motion for Bill 15-32. Speaker Richards, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a short opinion of mine. I think I understand where the author is coming from, but with the lack of data and evidence of what raising the age of consent is going to do, I think that it's not going to stop teenagers from having sex, and it may just increase the number of offenses in our data. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Representative Healy, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request for recess.
Sure. 1 minute recess? 5 minute recess?
Yes.
5 minute recess.
Thank you.
We are back in session. On the main motion, Representative Dahilig, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to send Bill 15-32 back to Committee on Public Safety and Judiciary.
There's been a motion to send Bill 15-32 back to committee. Are there any objections? All right. There's been an objection. We'll put it to a vote by show of hands. For those who would like to send the bill back to committee, please raise your hand. That is 50% plus 1. Motion passes. Moving on, Representative LeBang.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place Resolution 11-32 to second reading file.
Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. You may continue.
Cody's Resolution 11-32 intends to recognize the month of April as Youth Month, or Mes Manhoven. We as Youth Congress representatives represent the youth of our school or villages and basically the youth of our island. As the chairman on the Committee on Education and Youth Affairs, I am privileged and honored to be the main sponsor of this resolution with recognizing the month of April as Youth Month. I feel that the youth of our island is recognized to be part of our community, that the youth matters, and that their voices are heard. Above all, we the youth are often referred to as the future of this island, the leaders of tomorrow. I feel that it is fitting to commend different groups and agencies that promote and protect our island's youth, as well as individuals that help the youth and here's the youth of Guam. Yesterday, I am privileged to discuss some ideas with the DYA director regarding Youth Month, and they're looking forward with this resolution as well. And that's basically my whole opening statement for this resolution.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. Would anyone like to speak on the resolution? Representative Tyron.
I'd just like to say that I strongly support this resolution as it acknowledges the youth of our island, which have so much passion, ingenuity, and brilliance to become leaders of tomorrow. And so I feel that it is important to acknowledge them and their contributions thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tyron. Would anyone else like to speak on the resolution? Seeing as no one else would, Representative LeBang, you can make your closing statements.
Mr. Speaker, I'm waiving closing statement and I move this bill to third reading file for voting.
Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, the motion passes. Moving on. Representative Kaneni, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I make a motion to place Resolution 12-32 to the second reading file.
There's been a motion to place Resolution 12-32 to the second reading file. Any objections? So there's none. Motion passes. You may continue.
Okay, so Resolution 12-32 is relative to establishing a Democratic and Republican caucus in the Guam Youth Congress. One of the aims of this resolution is to kind of mirror the Guam legislature and the United States Congress in their ways of, dealing with debates on the floor with party affiliations. One strong point to this resolution that was made to me a couple times was, do we have to pick a side? And the answer is no. The way I wrote this was, if you want to pick a party, if you want to pick a side, you can. You know, if you feel your views are strongly Democratic or Republican enough, you should join a caucus. But if you feel that you do not want to belong to either one, or that your views do not align with either party, you do not have to declare for either of the caucuses. The point of this rule was to bring us closer in relations to the Guam legislature, as is part of our mission here as the Guam Youth Congress. Other than that, I'm interested to hear any questions and debate on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kaneni. On the resolution, Representative Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I'd just like to say, as a co-sponsor of this resolution, I'd ask all the representatives here to fully support this, because I believe that this would give an opportunity for all of our members to be involved with this body, who aren't necessarily, you know, committee chairs or vice chairs and so on and so forth. And a survey conducted by Representative DeLohan, who isn't unfortunately here, shows that there are representatives who do affiliate themselves either as Democrats or Republicans, and there are those who say they're independent. So I believe that this resolution would give a chance for everyone to be involved in our process. And as Representative Kennedy stated, this would help us to mirror the legislature and, of course, Congress. So I'd ask that everyone here support this bill, or resolution, excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Blas. Would anyone else like to speak on the resolution? Representative LeBang.
I just want to fix a grammatical error, technical errors in here. It's just on page 1, line 8, the way they type down youth is capital Y-O. Can we lowercase down O?
There's been an amendment, an amendment to change on line 8 of page 1 the capital O after the capital Y in youth to a lowercase o. Are there any objections? Seeing as none, motion passes. Would anyone else like to speak on the resolution? Representative Santos.
I think that this resolution helps to clarify where political parties lie in the Youth Congress, because I feel like a lot of times we haven't operated in this way. And I'm interested to see where the body votes, because I think that I don't really know if the body as a whole wants to be partisan like this or not. I just wanted to see what everyone else thinks. But if the body wants a partisanship, then I'll support the resolution.
Representative Tyron.
I have a question for the sponsor of the resolution, if you would yield.
Do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Please continue.
So in the case that a faction caucus is established, particularly one based on ethnicity, does that have to be like clarified with certain documents stating that you are ethnicity, or can like anybody who feels they are join?
I mean, it's going to be up to the caucus, the factional caucus leaders at the time. If they feel they want extra evidence of you being an ethnicity or proposing a certain position, that is up to them. However, I feel that most of these caucuses will be very open with there's only one exception I can see, and that will probably be the Women's Caucus that I plan on introducing a resolution for later in accordance with some of our female representatives. But other than that, the factional caucuses are it's up to their leadership to decide whether you can join or not, I guess.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tyron. Would anyone else like to speak on the resolution? Seeing as no one else does, Representative Kaneni, you may make your closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess, thank you, Representative Tyron, for bringing that up. The one part I didn't expound on, I guess, is factional caucuses. It's in the later part of the new Rule 28. It's established around similar, you guys can establish a caucus around similar political views, which is basically your party caucuses, your ethnicity, common heritage, gender, or other defining factors accepted by the chairperson on the Committee of Rules. So if you have some outrageous idea, obviously I feel the floor leader will shoot down your idea. But other than that, you know, factional caucuses happen in the US Congress. I'm not very sure about the Guam legislature, but I know they do have a party system in the Guam legislature. And that is something I would like to try to emulate here as we continue to, you know, learn about the legislative process. Other than that, I would like to make a motion to place Resolution 12-32 into the third reading file.
There's been a motion to place Resolution 12-32 to the third reading file. Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. We have exhausted our agenda for the second reading file. Can I get Representative LeBang or Representative Santos? You're recognized.
I would like to make a motion to have second roll call reflect first roll call, and to excuse members not present today.
There's been a motion to have second roll call reflect first roll call and to excuse members not present. Are there any objections? Representative Kaneni.
Just as a point, wasn't Representative Maige here for first roll call but left during the middle of the session? Would that affect anything? No? Okay, because you had a thing to have second roll call reflect first roll call, and I thought she was here for the first roll call.
So do you still object? Okay. All right, since there are no objections, the motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I still have the floor, I would like to, before we consider the daily file, I would like to make a motion to waive engrossment for a later time. As we can see, we're all, some of the members wish to participate in Special Olympics, and I feel that we can put off engrossment to a later time.
Understood. Thank you, Representative Santos. Let's now move on to the third reading file. Can I get a reading?
Can we get a vote on the motion?
Oh. Can you?
I made a motion to waive engrossment.
Oh, I asked if there were objections and there were none. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the third reading file. Can I get a reading, please?
Bill number 9-32, introduced by DeMarco Thomas Kaneni. An act to add section 611 to chapter 6, title 3, Guam Code annotated, and to amend section 7105 of chapter 7, title 3, Guam Code annotated, relative to establishing an independent designation for candidates for a legislature in Guam.
Can I get a roll call?
Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, pass. Representative Byron Blas. Representative Byron Blas, aye. Representative Travis Blas. Representative Travis Blas, aye. Representative Abriana Cruz. Representative Cruz, pass. Representative DeHelic. Representative DeHelic, pass. Representative DeGracia. Representative DeGracia, aye. Representative DeChoso. I'm sorry? Representative DeChoso, nay. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, nay. Representative Duenas. Representative Duenas, excused. Representative Davin Felician. Representative Felician, nay. Representative LeBang. Representative LeBang, pass. Secretary Lorenzo? Secretary Lorenzo, nay. Representative Maige. Representative Maige excused. Representative Metanani. Representative Metanani pass. Representative Peretta. Representative Peretta, nay. Representative Kennedy. Representative Kennedy, aye. Speaker Richards.
Pass.
Speaker Richards, pass. Representative Elijah Santos. Representative Elijah Santos, aye. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, nay. Representative Tyron. Representative Tyron, nay. Representative Trinidad. Representative Trinidad, nay. Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, nay. Representative Cruz. Representative Cruz, nay. Representative DeHelic. Representative DeHelic, nay. Representative LeBang. Representative LeBang, pass. Representative Matanani. Representative Matanani, nay. Speaker Richards.
Pass.
Speaker Richards, pass. Representative LeBang. Representative LeBang, nay. Speaker Richards.
Nay.
Speaker Richards, nay.
With 5 ayes and 14 nays, 2 excused, Bill 9-32 hereby fails. Moving on.
Bill number 10-32, introduced by DeMarco Thomas Kennedy, an act to amend section 3103.3 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 16, Guam Code annotated, relative to providing automatic voter registration for Guam residents.
Roll call.
Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, aye. Representative Byron Blas. Representative Byron Blas, aye. Representative Travis Blas. Representative Travis Blas, aye. Representative Cruz. Representative Cruz, aye. Representative DeHelic. Representative DeHelic, aye. Representative DeGracia. Representative DeGracia, aye. Representative DeChoso. Representative DeChoso, aye. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, aye. Representative Duenas. Representative Duenas excused. Representative Felison. Representative Felison, aye. Representative LeBang. Representative LeBang, aye. Secretary Lorenzo. Secretary Lorenzo, aye. Representative Maige. Representative Maige excused. Representative Metanani. Representative Metanani, aye. Representative Peretta. Representative Peretta, aye. Representative Kennedy. Representative Kennedy, aye. Speaker Richards.
Aye.
Speaker Richards, aye. Representative Elijah Santos. Representative Elijah Santos, aye. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, aye. Representative Tyron. Representative Tyron, aye. Representative Trinidad. Representative Trinidad, aye.
With a unanimous vote, Bill 10-32 hereby passes. Moving on.
Bill number, hang on one second. Bill number 16-32, introduced by Joshua M. DeChoso, Christian F. Valencia, Davin R. Filasan, Al Edward C. Labang, Noel Brandon DeGracia. An act to add Chapter 93 to Title 9 Guam Code annotated relative to providing family members of an individual who they fear is a danger to them, himself, herself, or others, new tools to prevent gun violence, and to cite this act as the Gun Violence Prevention Act, Order Act of 2019.
Roll call, please.
Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, aye. Representative Byron Blas. Representative Byron Blas, aye. Representative Travis Blas. Representative Travis Blas, aye. Representative Cruz. Representative Cruz, aye. Representative DeHelig. Representative DeHelig, aye. Representative DeGracia. Representative DeGracia, aye. Representative DeChoso. Representative DeChoso, aye. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, aye. Representative Duenas. Representative Duenas, excuse. Representative Felisan. Representative Felisan, aye. Representative Labang. Representative Labang, aye. Secretary Lorenzo. Secretary Lorenzo, aye. Representative Maige. Representative Maige, excuse. Representative Matsanani. Representative Matsanani, aye. Representative Peretta. Representative Peretta, aye. Representative Kennedy. Representative Kennedy, pass. Speaker Richards.
Aye.
Speaker Richards, aye. Representative Elijah Santos. Representative Elijah Santos, aye. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, aye. Representative Tyron. Representative Tyron, aye. Representative Trinidad. I'm sorry? Representative Trinidad, aye. Speaker Richards.
Aye.
Speaker Richards, aye. I apologize. Representative Kennedy. Representative Kennedy, aye.
With another unanimous vote, Bill 16-32 hereby passes. Moving on.
Resolution number 11-32, introduced by Al Edward C. Labang, Byron Blas, Casey Rosario, Isabel Valencia, Travis Blas, relative to recognizing the month of April 2019. Relative to recognizing the month of April 2019 as Youth Month, and to further commend organizations and individuals promoting the youth of Guam.
We'll vote by show of hands. All those in favor, please raise your hand. With a unanimous vote, Resolution 11-32 hereby passes. Moving on.
Resolution 12-32, introduced by DeMarco Thomas Kaneni, Byron Blas, Maria DeLohan, Al Edward Silabang. Relative to adding a Rule 28 to the standing rules of the 32nd Guam Youth Congress, establishing the Democratic and Republican caucuses as official party caucuses of the 32nd Guam Youth Congress.
Roll call.
Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, pass. Representative Byron Blas. Representative Byron Blas, aye. Representative Travis Blas. Representative Travis Blas, aye. Representative Cruz. Representative Cruz, nay. Representative DeHelig. Representative DeHelig, nay. Representative DeGracia. Representative DeGracia, aye. Representative DeChoso. Representative DeChoso, aye. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, pass. Representative Duenas. Representative Duenas, excuse. Representative Felison. Representative Felison, pass. Representative Labang. Representative Labang, aye. Secretary Lorenzo. Secretary Lorenzo, pass. Representative Maige. Representative Maige, excused. Representative Metanani. Representative Metanani, aye. Representative Pereda. Representative Pereda, aye. Representative Kaneni. Representative Kaneni, aye. Speaker Richards.
Nay.
Speaker Richards, nay. Representative Elijah Santos. Representative Elijah Santos, aye. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, pass. Representative Tyron. Representative Tyron, aye. Representative Trinidad. Representative Trinidad, aye. Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, pass. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, pass. Representative Felison. Representative Felison, nay. Secretary Lorenzo. Secretary Lorenzo, pass. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, pass. Representative Uggan. Representative Uggan, aye. Representative Dinsman. Representative Dinsman, nay. Secretary Lorenzo. Secretary Lorenzo, nay. Representative Javen Santos. Representative Javen Santos, aye.
With a vote of 13 ayes and 6 nays, Resolution 12-32 hereby passes. We have exhausted all the items. Moving on to brief extension of remarks. Representative Kaneni.
Sorry. Regarding all the bills and everything discussed today, I would like to thank everybody who supported Bill 9, 10, and Resolution 12. I was a little bit disappointed with Bill 9 considering there was no debate but a lot of nay votes and nothing said about it. That being said, it was debated for 2 weeks. It did come back unchanged, so I was a little disappointed by the body to find out that no one spoke up and it was shut down anyways. However, I would like to praise Bill 10 because it's a crucial part to improving our electoral system, the Automatic Voter Registration Act. And finally, with the Resolution 12, which kind of gave me a little bit of stress, I think that it's a great addition to the Guam Youth Congress. It's something we haven't done, and it's a new and exciting prospect for us to give us, a little bit more new life. Other than that, thank you guys for the way you guys vote, and continue to speak your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kaneni. Representative Santos?
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Health and Human Services and Gender Affairs currently has a vacancy for their chairman. Representative Quintanilla had stepped down, so I think in the honor of passing the torch, I would like to make I was wondering if we could open the floor to nominations for the chairman. Okay, so I guess I'd like to make a motion to go back to motions to discuss nominations for resolution or for the chairman of the Committee on Health and Human Services and Gender Affairs.
Any objections? Motion passes. Representative LeBang?
Mr. Speaker, I would like to nominate this person because I think she's the best fit for this committee as a social worker and as a passionate leader of she's been my friend ever since I started Guam Youth Congress, and I would like to nominate our Legislative Secretary from Barrigada, Stephanie F. L. Lorenzo.
Do you accept the nomination? Thank you. Representative Tyron?
I support the nomination made, and although I myself was considering to maybe try and attempt to get it, but the legislative secretary is honestly an awesome leader, and I fully support that nomination. I do not want beef, so thank you.
Are you sure? Thank you, Representative Tyron. Are there any other nominations? Representative Uggan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Vice Chairman of the Committee on Health and Human Services, I would like to express my support for Stephanie. Her experience I believe her experience in social work will really help our committee with the things that we plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Uggan. Are there any other nominations? Representative Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to close nominations.
There's been a motion to close nominations. Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, nominations are closed. We have one person, so congrats, Steph. You're the new chairman. All right. Moving back to brief extension of remarks. Representative Tyron.
I'd like to just apologize for my personal conduct during recess, as I was unaware of a rule, and so I apologize to the body. And I have great respect for this facility we are using, so I'm sorry, and it will not happen again. Thank you.
We forgive you. Representative LeBang.
I just want to say I would like to thank everyone who supported Resolution 11-32. I've been privileged to experience firsthand how DYA operates yesterday, and I will say their facility is kind of out of date, and I think if anyone has anything that could help them with their agenda, which is promoting the youth and the youth development of our island, please feel free to reach me out, because I already set up the connection with Ms. Bethany Brennan and Ms. Crisinda Ogden, which are the director and deputy directors of that department. And I was hoping that we could do a resolution presentation soon for Resolution 11 for next month, hopefully. And regarding Bill 15, I kind of anticipated that it kind of here that it's to subject matter, but I think that moving it back to committee is a right move, and I just feel that these two things won't work if we only pass one, so it might be another bill that will support that bill. So please expect that, and that's all for my brief of discussion remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative LeBang. Anyone else? Representative Kennedy?
Sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier, but because of the passage of Resolution 12-32, at least on the Democratic side, I would like to invite all those who want to identify as Democrats to join me and Representative LeBang. Temporarily, we'll be both setting up the caucus until there's an election for a new leader and a new whip. However, on the Republican side, I leave it open to you guys to decide how you guys want to set up and how you guys want to organize. Other than that, I invite all those who want to identify as Democrats, or even if you're slightly left-leaning, I do invite you to try and join us, because it's gonna be a new process. It's gonna be expressing our views as a party. It's something you're not saying something you have to get used to, but it's something that is benefit for you. It helps you see your point of views and other people's point of views in the kind of the same light, because you share the same political ideology. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kennedy. Anyone else? Representative DeChoso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say in regards to Bill 16-32, which passed, I just want to first of all thank my fellow co-sponsors for their support in deliberating and making the bill as appropriate for legislation as possible. And moreover, I want to thank the body for their support and providing input in making the bill, allowing the bill to pass. I think it's an important step for the youth of Guam, especially with gun violence being such a pertinent issue around the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeChoso. Anyone else? Seeing as there are none, I'll go ahead and give my brief extension of remarks. It's 12:11. This is a very, very long session, but I'm glad that we stuck through it. I'd just like to commend some of the freshman representatives for speaking up this session, and I'd like to encourage the other freshman representatives to speak your mind, speak your opinion. That really will help our debate and get things passed. Let's move on to announcements. Representative Felicen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a Chamorro festival thing at Agania Shopping Center at around, I don't know what time it starts, but I will be performing there with my band. We will be doing island music. From around 2 to 4. So please come by and support local bands. Thank you.
You're playing from 2 to 4?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Any other announcements? Representative Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. This coming Tuesday, March 19th, it is known at FD as Father News Day. And along with that, in the afternoon at 3:30, my school's National Honor Society chapter will be inducting 17 new members, juniors and sophomores. So I invite anyone here to come along and see how the ceremony is conducted, and to feel free to join us for refreshments after. So.
Thank you. Representative Tyron?
So I'd just like to extend, I guess, okay, like, never mind, okay. So I'd just like to say Sindangkalina Sizos Maasi to all of the supporters and participants in the St. John's School 2K and 5K, which was held this morning at the Ipao Beach Park. As far as municipality activities, the Guam Cocoa Kids Festival will take place March 24, 2019. And that will be at the Ipao Beach Park, I believe. The St. Anthony Parish Masses take place at 6, 8, 9:30, 11, 12:30, and 5 and 7 on Sundays. Blessed Diego Parish has Masses at 7 and 9, and St. Andrew Kim has Masses at 10:30 in Korean. Free Zumba classes every Monday at the Tumuning Community Center at 5:30 p.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays, they are at 5:30 p.m. in the Tumuning Gym. Saina Maasi Taguma Tautau Tanu, as well as Mrs. Catherine Gell for their efforts in the St. John's School Chamorro Week, or Simon and Chamorro. And St. John's School Lower School has the Wacky Olympics, which will be held on March 21st. So all of the community is invited to attend. The Spring Festival will be on March 22nd, and again, all the community is invited to attend. The St. Anthony Catholic School Spring Concert is from 6 to 8 on Thursday and Friday of this upcoming week. The Tumuning Elementary School classes extend until May 31st. Chief Brody Elementary School has a notice for car riders that they must be picked up by 3:15, otherwise personnel will contact Child Protective Services by Public Law 20-209. John F. Kennedy High School advises all of their upper school students to carefully use the Kmart crosswalk, and the Tumuning Farmers Market is upcoming. You may contact the mayor's office for information on that. And other than that, I guess happy Chamorro Month. It's a great opportunity for all of us to celebrate our culture, and please try and get engaged with the many activities going on. Thank you.
Bibe. All right. Representative DeHelig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize that yesterday was March 15 was School Strike for Climate Day, where students across the world, the youth, brought awareness to climate change by walking out and showing how important the climate change is to the youth of the world. I'd also like to recognize that Ukudu High School band and choir students who continue to spread their love for music as they performed at the Tumon Bay Music Festival from February 28 to March 9. Our honor choir, Magnifico, received silver. Our rock band received both silver and gold, and our concert band received gold awards. In addition to that, our Ukudu High School concert band shared the Tumon Bay Music Festival Sweepstakes Award, the first time a Guam Department of High School won that award. I'd like to also congratulate their director, Mr. Max Warnkilio, on a job well done, and Biba Ukudu.
All right. Thank you, Representative DeHelig. Any other announcements? Representative Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hafaday. So the Academy of Our Lady of Guam has a club called the Walking Nuns, in which Thursdays during lunch we walk around the streets of Agana and provide necessities such as toiletries, food, water, blankets, clothes, whatever you could think of. It's kind of like we're a homeless shelter. So currently we are in need of necessities. If anyone from Youth Congress would like to stop by and donate, we would greatly appreciate that. You could contact me for more information on what you could donate or how you can donate. So, Sizos Masi.
Thank you, Representative Cruz. Any other announcements? Well, I would like to announce that this evening at 7:30 p.m., the University of Guam Laddie Tones and Mangilaw Hot Jazz are having a concert at the Fine Arts Theater on campus. So if you'd like to see your beloved Vice Speaker sing a couple songs, you can come check that out. It's $5. All right. Seeing as there are no other announcements, can I get a motion to adjourn? Representative Kaneni.
Mr. Speaker, I make a motion to adjourn this session of the Guam Youth Congress.
Are there any objections? Seeing as there are none, motion passes. We are adjourned.